Unfortunately, despite all our progress against ISIL on the battlefield and in the financial realm, our efforts have not reduced the group's terrorism capability and global reach. We judge that ISIL is training and attempting to deploy operatives for further attacks. ISIL has a large cadre of Western fighters who could potentially serve as operatives for attacks in the West. And the group is probably exploring a variety of means for infiltrating operatives into the West, including in refugee flows, smuggling routes, and legitimate methods of travel. Furthermore, as we have seen in Orlando, San Bernardino, and elsewhere, ISIL is attempting to inspire attacks by sympathizers who have no direct links to the group. Last month, for example, a senior ISIL figure publicly urged the group's followers to conduct attacks in their home countries if they were unable to travel to Syria and Iraq.
Broadcasting live on the UnitedWest.org AM radio network and simulcasting on DirecTV, iHeartRadio, Roku, and the World Wide Web, this is Enemies of the State with Tom Trento.
Tom Trento, Director of the United West, here with a special edition of Enemies of the State. Today we have our dear friend and counterterrorism expert, Captain Dan Gordon. He's in the reserves with the IDF over 40 years, has fought in several wars, has dealt with Islamic Jihad for many years in combat, and has written on it extensively. Dan Gordon, you've been watching the events in Orlando. Your impression when you first saw this pop up on the news?
You know, my impression was it's Islamist terror, and it's hit us again. And you wonder what it will take for us to wake up. People said San Bernardino was a wake-up call. Nobody woke up. People are saying this is a wake-up call. I don't see any signs of anyone waking up. It is a horrible, not tragedy. Tragedies are when trains go off the tracks. It's a horrible atrocity. It's an act of abject terror against innocent people. And the horrible thing is, it's not going to be the last one, and it's not going to be the biggest one. And we need to change the mindset of our government, our military, our police, our first responders, and our civilians, because this is what we are in for. And unless we change that mindset from a victim mentality, which is where we're at right now, to a survivor mentality, and then a victor mentality, we're in for a lot of tough times.
Well, Dan, you served for many years, as I said, in the IDF, but you're an American citizen, born here in the good old United States. You've worked as a Hollywood screenwriter very successfully. You've written on this issue. I want to touch on one of the books in a moment. But help us understand from your background, when we got on the ground, the United West team, early Sunday, and by the way, I think you know, we broke the story 2 months ago that this mosque right outside of Orlando had a imam in there, a Shia imam, who was calling for the killing of homosexuals for their own good. Well,
yes,
we got on the ground.
Compassionate thing to do.
What's that?
He said it was the compassionate thing to do.
Compassionate thing to do. When we got on the ground and we had an opportunity to interview the Bill Nelson, the senior senator from the state of Florida, the governor, Rick Scott, the chief of the sheriff of Orange County, Dimmings, and several other law enforcement people, we were stunned with the apprehension to include as a prime driver Islamic Jihad. And it wasn't because the facts weren't there. The facts were there. It was, well, we have to wait for more information. How is there going to be a wake-up call if our leaders are fearful to identify the cause of the tragedy, of the attack? It's not a tragedy, you're right.
You've answered your own question. I mean, the rampant refusal, it's not even political correctness anymore. It's simply a refusal. It's sticking your head in the sand to recognize what is being shouted at you by the perpetrator. trust me, the perpetrator knows his motives better than you do. And if the perpetrator says, I'm doing this as an act of jihad on behalf of the Islamic State, believe him. If the perpetrator says, I pledge my allegiance to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, believe him. If he says that I'm doing this, not because I hate gays, but because of, I want you to taste that was the quote, I want you to taste the vengeance of the Islamic State for the crimes that you've committed against Islam, against the Islamic people, against the Ummah. Believe him. He honestly knows what he's talking about. He knows what motivates him. He knows why he's doing it. He's not confused. He knows exactly what he's doing. He knows how it's going to end. We were just talking off the air that you were talking about the fact that he rushed out into a hail of bullets. He knew he was not going to live through that day. He didn't want to live through that day. He wanted, quote unquote, martyrdom. And he got it. And why we refuse to identify that and realize it is staggering. And when people say, when our leaders say, almost what difference does it make now? When they say, why would using the term radical Islam or radical jihadism change anything? What would it contribute? The answer is very simple. If we had used the term radical Islam and made the military aware and inculcated with the notion that that is who we are at war with, someone might have noticed on Major Nidal's business card that it said soldier of Allah. And they may have said, wait a second, we're at war with radical Islam. Maybe we ought not promote him, and maybe we ought to keep an eye on him. If someone had said, we are at war with radical Islam, maybe the neighbors in San Bernardino who watched men going in and out of a garage, assembling explosives, loading weapons, wouldn't have said, gee, I don't want to call because I'm afraid of being called an Islamophobe. The fear of being guilty of the high crime of Islamophobia, which God only knows, it's almost as bad as someone who supports the name the Washington Redskins. I mean, it's that high of a crime. Literally has cost people's lives. I mean, calling the Washington Redskins may anger this person, that person, or the other person. Nobody's been dead over it. No one's been killed over it. People have been killed because we refuse to accept and identify the people who proclaim from the rooftops that they seek our destruction, that the black flag of ISIS will fly over the White House, that they will behead, burn alive, drown our men, sell our women into sex slavery, kill our children, and they will do this in the name of what I agree is a warped version of a particular religion, but it is a version of that particular religion. And if you say, gee, only 1% of that, the people who hold that belief have this warped vision, you're not painting with a broad brush if you say 1% of a billion people is a lot of guys you have to be worried about. And you're not doing a disservice. I will tell you from personal experience, going in and out of, you mentioned I was born in the United States. I was raised both in Israel and in the United States. I remember vividly numbers of occasions going out of Ben Gurion Airport where Palestinian Arabs and Israeli Arabs have called over security officials and said, why aren't you checking that, my fellow Arab, my fellow Palestinian out a little more carefully? I overheard something he was saying, and you got to check him out. Because that Palestinian Arab, regardless of his ideology, was getting on the same plane. Yeah. And he didn't plan martyrdom for that day. And he didn't consider it painting a broad brush against his religion or his people to notify security authorities because he was getting on the same flight. And he wanted somebody to pay attention. And I think we have to have the same mentality of that Palestinian who's getting on the same flight, because we're all getting on the same flight. And it's not racist to say that there is a segment within a warped version of Islam that seeks our death and destruction. It's simply common sense. And unless we do that, we are giving the enemy who wants to kill us the advantage. And why should we do that?
Well, our president says in a speech just the other day, just the opposite. He said, if we use these terms, and you're arguing and I argue, terms are necessary to define the enemy so that we know who we're fighting and how to fight them. He says when we use these terms, we're playing into the hands of the bad guys and making them hate us more, therefore make the situation worse for us. Now, we don't have enough time to deconstruct the absurdity of that way of thinking. But if you remember, when this president came into office, he was opposed to gay marriage. He was completely for marriage between a man and a woman. Then, in some epiphany at breakfast with his 10-year-old daughter, he learned that gay marriage is a good thing. And now he not only endorses it, he paints the White House with the colors of the rainbow. I would think that Islamic jihadis are going to be a little more offended by that position of the president on gay marriage than if he refers to them as Islamic jihadis. So he needs to stop supporting the gay community if he's serious about not offending the jihadis so they hate us more. It's nonsensical. But Dan, this was one guy.
It's nonsensical.
This was one guy with a kit that Dabiq, the Islamic State's magazine, Inspire, AQ's magazine, Al-Qaeda, AR, and these aren't automatic weapons.
Right.
They're not modifying. You got to pull the trigger, an AR, a sidearm, and then some sort of explosive device. And he said he had explosive devices. What would happen if a bunch of these jihadis, I don't know, came through the southern border and set out to do the same thing Omar Mateen did as one individual? What would happen? Maybe a book has been written about that called Day of the Dead, Book 2, America. Tell us that scenario.
Look, what I'm telling you is not theoretical. It's not hypothetical. There has been a dress rehearsal of it. In fact, there have been 6 dress rehearsals of it. In 2014, during the Hamas-Israel war, or Operation Tzuketan, or I think it was called, translated as Pillar of Defense, Hamas engaged in 6 terrorist tunnel attack attempts against Israel. These were tunnels that began in Gaza, went for 1.5 miles, 2 miles, underneath the internationally recognized border of Israel, the 1948 border of Israel, by the way. So these weren't settlements, these weren't settlers. This is, everyone recognizes this, the 1948 border of Israel. The tunnels came up beside kindergartens, dining halls, community centers. Out of each of these tunnels popped a dozen terrorists, each one equipped with AK-47s, thousands of rounds of ammunition, 2 RPGs apiece. By the way, an RPG can go through a row of houses, not just a house. And most frightening of all, plastic handcuffs, which meant their intent was to take as many civilian hostages as possible and drag them back into Gaza and put them in underground cells, which they had prepared. Now, you may say, well, that's just a Jewish problem. What does Gaza have to do with me? What it has to do with me as an American is, we know for a fact that ISIS had operatives in Gaza then, and has operatives in Gaza now who are training, but the ones they had in Gaza then in 2014 were there to observe the efficacy of the terrorist tunnel attacks. Now, why was ISIS doing that? Because they're planning to dig tunnels to attack Israel? They're not. ISIS is in the Golan Heights now, but they're not in tunnel digging range against Israel. And ISIS has sort of been put on notice by the Israeli government and the Israeli army that if they try to mess with us, we'll mess with them really badly. And so, if you notice, Israel has not been attacked yet by ISIS. Belgium has, France has, the United States has. Israel has not, even though they're right on our border. They were there,
it's an interesting point,
looking at those tunnels, seeing how they would apply to attacks against the United States. Now, we know that what ISIS has done in Europe is to establish a pocket of Islamist radicalism in Belgium, and it's a very strong pocket. And that pocket was used to organize the attacks, not only of Charlie Hebdo, but the Bataclan attacks, where 130 people were killed in Paris only 6 months ago. President Hollande, who is not a conservative, who is a socialist president, came out and had enough presence of mind to say this, and I'm quoting him pretty exactly, I may miss a word or two, but this was the quote: "This act of war," didn't say it was a catastrophe or a tragedy, he said this act of war was planned in Syria, organized in Belgium, and carried out with the complicity of French citizens. That's about as concise a statement as I can think of about what happened in France. Yep. I fear that we will have an American president one day who will refer to a mass casualty attack that has come from ISIS. And just this morning, Director of the CIA, Brennan, again, not a flaming conservative, he is the director of the CIA, he has professional expertise and access to more knowledge than you or I will ever dream of, said that ISIS, not may, ISIS will infiltrate, ISIS operatives, along with the refugees, are doing it right now. So whether they come into Europe or whether they go from Europe, once they're there, on a flight to Central or South America, which is easy to do, and then move their way northward, which we know is very easy to do, to the northern Mexico border, which is not controlled in many places by the Mexican government, but by the cartels. And the cartels and the terrorist organizations, we know for a fact, have established deep and thriving ties. ISIS doesn't need to dig a terrorist tunnel to get into the United States. They just need to rent one from the cartels for the day. And ISIS has a couple $2 billion. That's a language that the cartels understand. And if you say, well, why would they need a tunnel? They can walk across the border. The reason they would need a tunnel, which is ancient warfare, tunnel warfare has been used for thousands of years. But tunnel warfare neutralizes a technologically superior enemy's ability to detect you. If you come walking across the border with 100 terrorists who have AK-47s and RPGs on them, you will detect them before they get to the target. And if you have an aggressive state of mind as opposed to a passive one, you will be able to take them out. If they're down in a tunnel that's 100 feet deep and that goes for 2 miles from Tijuana into San Diego, or from Nuevo Laredo into El Paso, or from northern Mexico into southern Arizona, you won't see them until they come up in your midst. I was in a tunnel when I was researching the book, which is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. It was meticulously researched. I was with former DEA, former FBI counterterrorism, Navy SEALs, you name it. I've been in several of the tunnels, one of which was discovered the exit was in a warehouse in downtown San Diego, where people are used to seeing trucks coming in and going out. So it's not a problem to go in there and disperse your fighters. If you infiltrate 100 ISIS fighters into downtown San Diego and then put them in vans and take them to various spots of the city, if you saw one guy take out 50 people in Orlando, if you saw a handful take out 130 in Paris, imagine for a second what 100 can do. And just so you understand ISIS's battle doctrine, we know what it is from Mosul, we know what it is from Fallujah. And it would work better in the United States, by the way, than it works in Fallujah. You first set off a truck bomb. Not easy to make. Everyone knows that Timothy McVeigh, who wasn't the brightest bulb in the lamp, and Terry Nichols were able to make a bomb that took out the entire facade of the federal building in Oklahoma City, and was up until then the worst terrorist attack ever perpetrated against the United States, and hundreds of people were killed and hundreds more wounded, amongst them scores of children, federal employees, FBI agents, DEA agents. A horrific attack. And they made it with nothing more complicated than ammonium nitrate fertilizer and diesel fuel. It's not a difficult bomb to make. So you set off, in ISIS's doctrine, a truck bomb in one part of the city. Now you have an option. You've already scouted what the various routes are to that location, and you've already seen what first responders do. So you can plant additional devices to take out the first responders on their way to that location, because you know they're all going to converge on it. You've got hundreds of people dead. You've got chaos. Every cop, every medic, every fire engine is going to converge on that location. You want to take them all out? You can. Or what you may do is set off 3 devices in different spots all over the city. Now the entire city is in chaos. And all the first responders have divided into smaller groups, which makes them easier to take out. And you take them out as they rush to those locations. You have not yet used your infantry. You have not yet used your 100 armed terrorists. They're going to go someplace else where there are no first responders. You're talking about a terrorist attack which would dwarf 9/11. If you give me 50 motivated, well-armed, trained fighters and turn me loose in any sports stadium that holds 18,000 people, and I've got 50 guys with RPGs and AK-47s, what you saw in Orlando is going to look like kindergarten. I'll create a mass casualty attack that will cost thousands of lives, not hundreds of lives, but thousands of lives. And I'll do it within a very short period of time. I'll do it within probably the first 3 minutes. And what first responder is going to stop me? What security guard is going to stop me? The guy who takes your tickets? The cop who's there to keep the fans from rushing onto the floor after the game? Nobody's going to stop me. It'll be over inside of 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes max. That's the time frame. And so there are things that we could be doing and should be doing, and we're not.
Very sobering, very dark warning, Dan Gordon, to the United States of America. And sadly, folks, not only is what Dan just laid out in a very detailed fashion plausible, there are thousands of jihadis lining up to be those 50 or 100 who come to the United States to launch this attack, become shaheeds, become martyrs, and find their entrance into paradise. So we have willing warriors to do this. The network exists with the cartels. The weaponry is certainly there. And the United States, with our intelligence assets and all of that, are hamstrung by this administration to do the hardcore investigation that could reveal these sort of attacks. Dan, we only have a minute or 2 left. What is your challenge to Americans to wake up, as you said at the start of our show?
Well, honestly, I mean, I'm being self-serving, but it honestly is worthwhile. If you enjoy a good Tom Clancy, Vince Flynn read, pick up Day of the Dead Book 1 and Day of the Dead Book 2. Day of the Dead Book 1 is Book 1 Gaza, and Day of the Dead Book 2 is America. And it details how this kind of attack could happen and what could be done to thwart it. Get 2 copies. Read one for yourself and enjoy it as a thriller as much as you can enjoy this in the light of what happened in Orlando. Be informed by it. Educate yourself. And send the other copy to your legislator and tell him politely to get his head out of that realm where the sun never shines, and do his or her job in protecting you. And shift your own mindset from that of a victim to that of someone who's going to be a survivor. You know, we have drummed into us, if you catch on fire, stop, drop, and roll. If you're in an active shooter situation, your mindset has to be run if I can, hide if I can't, and fight if I must. You don't just, if you're 30 hostages being held by one jihadi, guess what? You outnumber him. Somebody might get killed, somebody might get hurt, but he's going to be tromped to death. And not all of you will die. And you have to wrap your head around that mindset, because unfortunately, we're living in a different time. It's not the era of Dog Day Afternoon where a bank robber will hold hostages in order to buy his ticket to freedom. We're in an era where terrorists will hold hostages in order to kill them.
All right, on that very sobering note, but very accurate delineation of the problem, we thank you, Dan Gordon, and everyone, please get both books. We have them. we read them. We were shocked at how true to life Dan's novel, his exciting novel is, and really it's a blueprint. It's their blueprint of what could be happening. And I love what you said, Dan. Stop, drop, and roll. All of us learned that as kids, but now it's run, hide, fight. Good stuff, Dan. We'll see you shortly. We'll get back to you shortly for more information.
Great seeing you, Tom.
All right, take it easy.